To me, here's another ironic character, writer, controversial, because number one, his origins were, from his father's origins anyhow, Austria-Hungary, the very country that he went back to bomb as part of the U.S. Army Air Force. As Ian said, he visited these villages. The U.S. Army Air Force, their bombing missions, they did something called carpet bombing. And for the first time in the history of war, immense civilian casualties. I think Zinn himself mentions Dresden in connection with that, and of course Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he comes up with the notion in his writings that there's no such thing as a holy war. My problem with that, the opposite of that would be, its inverse would be unholy peace, is what we had in Europe with the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism and eugenics and all the things that have a great human value to us. Now, I do agree with him that what started out as a good war went bad. So there was a period where the industrial military, in their great zeal, got greedy and inhumane. And one example would be, and this particular writer, whose name is Miller, he wrote a book called Canticle for Leibowitz. He was involved with the bombing of Monte Cassino. Eisenhower decided that let's take out, they couldn't go around it, they had to take it out, and they bombed it to smithereens. And then Miller, do you remember his first name? Doesn't matter. He also became an activist and felt very guilty about bombing, and as Zinn had. And the problem with the pacifism and championing the worker and some of the more left-wing liberal writers of Zinn's ideological temperament is that he didn't realize that in the United States, the workers, the hard hats, the so-called lumpen proletariat, tend to be very conservative. And most of these writers, beginning really with Marx, they didn't work. Their parents may have worked, but they didn't really work. And a movement started championing the worker and championing that what Ian referred to as the losers or the disenfranchised. And someone coined a term called the Ashcan oligarchy, which is the aristocracy of the disenfranchised, and exploiting that. And while he railed against venture capitalism, he exploited this as a writer, as many other writers, and even Noam Chomsky may be one, and turn it into something that was a capitalist commercial venture for themselves. Near the end of his writing career, Zinn published his famous People's History of the United States, followed by Young People's History of the United States. It became a kind of an industry. And that's the danger with left-wing ideology becoming industry, becoming an industrialized phenom, while the rest of us, the guys who suffer, are not part of that illustrious ivory tower left wing, I call them armchair Marxists, which is easy to be here, not so easy in the Gulag. So it's not as black and white sometimes as we read his work. So I've scanned through some of the stuff real fast once I heard that he's going to be on the agenda. That there are some complex issues. One is the major betrayal en masse of the American worker, and to find out where the American worker is. A worker who has been outsourced, the hard hats, and I'm astonished to have to report that Donald Trump is appealing to the very working class that Zinn had tried to champion. So, my dear friends, we have a problem and a lot of work to do. And that's the bad news. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now I will.
Follow the yellow brick road. And the light's not working in there today for some reason.
The light's not on.
Nope. Some issues going on.
Yeah, they changed some circuits. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name's Martha, and I just wanted to say a few words about Howard Zinn and how I feel that this choice of him this month was uniquely suited to being here at the Blueberry Patch, because his career has embodied so many of the same things that the Blueberry Patch founder, Dallas Bower, held the same sentiments, such as social equality, peace not more, humanity united for the greater good of all. And so I think Dallas would be really pleased to hear about Howard Zinn here today. Howard Zinn produced such a huge body of work, 44 books, and so as well as videos, radio broadcasts, speeches, lectures. A lot of them are available on disc these days. There's one that I got from Netflix. It's a video version of a book, You Can't Be Neutral on a Moving Train. And it's an autobiographical video, and it's really, really interesting. It gives the highlights of his career. I recommend it. And he's just so profoundly influenced basically 3 generations with his work, you know, between civil rights activists, social activists, anti-war, and it's just amazing, and he carried it through such a long career. And the influence that he's had on society spreads across, you know, television, motion pictures, as well as legislation, all of that, you know. Bruce Springsteen, Pearl Jam, The Simpsons on TV, you know, every genre you can think of has been influenced by him. And I have a few quotes here that kind of shed a little bit of light on his character. I'll just read them to you. It says, "When people don't understand that government doesn't have their interests in mind, they're more susceptible to go to war. Dissent is the highest form of patriotism. We need to decide that we will not go to war, whatever the reason is conjured up by politicians or the media, because war in our time is always indiscriminate. A war against innocence, a war against children. Most wars, after all, present themselves as humanitarian endeavors to help people." And here's a good one. "We don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an endless succession of presents, and to live now as we think humans should live, in deference to all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory." Those were some interesting quotes from him. And I know this is jumping ahead a little bit, but both Ian and Peter have mentioned it. His most famous book probably is The People's History of the United States. And it's fascinating. I haven't read it from cover to cover. It's a pretty big tome to go through, but it was published in 1980, and it just gives a fascinating perspective on things that you didn't learn in school, put it that way, not what you're taught in school. And I'll just read you the inside cover from it. Known for its lively, clear prose, as well as its scholarly research, A People's History is the only volume to tell America's story from the point of view of, and in the words of, American women, factory workers, African Americans, Native Americans, working poor, and immigrant laborers. As historian Howard Zinn shows, many of our country's great battles for a fair wage, an 8-hour workday, child labor laws, health and safety standards, universal suffrage, women's rights, racial equality, were carried out at the grassroots level against bloody resistance, covering Christopher Columbus's arrival to the election of 2000 and war on terror. I read it wrong. Okay, covering Christopher Columbus's arrival through the 2000 election and the war on terrorism, A People's History of the United States, which was nominated for the American Book Award in 1981 and has sold more than 1 million copies, features insightful analysis of the most important events in our history. So that's an overview of the perspective from which it's written, and it is fascinating. So, Ian, you want to carry on, or? Okay.